Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about descriptions, definitions, and instructions in technical writing. So, what are definitions, descriptions, and instructions? A definition is typically a brief explanation of an item or concept using words and sometimes graphics. A description is typically a longer explanation, usually accompanied by graphics of an object, mechanism, or process. And a set of instructions is a kind of process description intended to enable someone to carry out a task. So let's start with definitions. So the purpose of definitions are to clarify a description of a new development or a new technology in a technical field, to help specialists communicate with less knowledgeable readers, and primarily that's probably the kind of definitions that you will be required to communicate, trying to communicate technical information to readers who don't have a technical skill set or as technical a skill set as you do. So to define terms for readers from other cultures, and really it's not just other cultures, it's anyone who might struggle with um, a definition, you can add a glossary, a list of definitions. Try to use simplified English and easily recognizable terms. Pay close attention to your key terms, and use graphics whenever possible to help a reader understand a term or a concept. There are types of different definitions, 3 of them. There's parenthetical, and this is the kind of definition that's written inside parentheses next to the term, just like I did there. A sentence is literally what it says, a sentence or more, a couple of sentences that define a specific term. And then extended. Extended is usually like a paragraph or more, and it's really an in-depth explanation of a term. Some sentence definitions follow a typical pattern. So it's really, you have your item, and then you have the category, and then distinguishing characteristics. And I just did 2 examples here for you, really easy. A book is a group of written words bound together along one side. Okay, that's an easy definition about the book. We've got the categories, a group of written words, and some distinguishing characteristics bound together along one side. A pie, a baked dish of fruit, meat, or vegetables, usually with a pastry crust and top. Oh, that should say crust and bottom, okay? So we've got a baked dish of fruit, meat, or vegetables, and then usually a pastry crust and top. So there you go. Effective sentence definitions. Be specific in stating the category and the distinguishing characteristics. All right, be as specific as you possibly can. Don't describe a specific item if you are defining a general class of terms. Okay, so if you're talking about pies, don't talk about a vegetable pie or a fruit pie. Talk about pies in general. Don't write circular definitions. It is hot. Let's see, I'm trying to think of a good circular definition. A book is a book. So basically a circular definition is you're not really saying anything, you're just repeating what it is in different words. And that's not going to give your readers or your listeners a good, thorough understanding. Be sure the category contains a noun or a noun phrase rather than a phrase when, what, or where. This happens when. Certainly you can go on to do that in your extended definition, but in a sentence definition you want to say a book is, a pie is, okay? Extended definitions can contain graphics, examples, partition, which means they're broken into parts. So you might have an introduction, and then you might have some background information. So you break it down into pieces. Or you might talk about the pieces of the particular item. Comparison and contrast. You might compare an item to something else, talk about how it's similar and how it's different. An analogy, it is like something. Or negation, it is not like. Or etymology, the origin of the word Protestant means to protest. Okay, so it could be any one of those are elements that might be included in extended definitions. And you can certainly do more than one. You might break the item into partitions and provide examples and have graphics. You might do comparison contrast examples and graphics. You might do an analogy and a negation. You might do an etymology, graphics, and examples. So you can use a combination of these items. Descriptions can be verbal and or visual representations. Remember that. So they can be objects like a thermostat, mechanisms, a piece of machinery, or a process, how to do something. So these are all kind of subcategories of types of descriptions. And you can always use pictures. Remember back when we were looking at imagery, graphics, and I'm sure I said, because I've said it a million times, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Sometimes it is much easier to convey a large quantity of information by simply having a picture. So for example, think about when you're putting furniture together or something together, and you've got a bunch of screws. I can say use screw S61A, which I have given you the name of the screw, or I can have a picture that is to scale of the screw and say use the screw that's this size. That's a lot easier and more specific for you. When writing descriptions, clearly indicate the nature and scope of the description. This item describes, or this item is, introduce the description clearly. What's your purpose for giving the description? What are you trying to achieve? What do you want your readers to get from your description, to learn from it? Provide enough detail. You really want to provide enough information and detail so that the person has a good idea of what you are describing. And then conclude the description. So you can see from elements A, B, and C, or you can see that elements A, B, and C are required in order to have D. But basically, a written description should be able to stand on its own with a clear beginning, middle, and end. And that's what I want you to get from this. Introduce object or mechanism descriptions. What is the item? What is the function of the item? What does the item look like? How does the item work? What are the principal parts of the item? So you can see that this is really detailed. So you're first going to list what the item is. Then how do you use, what is the purpose of the item? What does it look like? How does it work? And what parts are integral to that item? All of those are required elements when you are describing an object or a mechanism. So for example, think about a thermostat. What is the item? The item is a thermostat. What is the function of the item? To regulate the temperature. What does the item look like? Well, it can look a couple of different ways. How does the item work? Well, depending on the type of thermostat will depend on how it works. And what are the principal parts? Those of you in HVAC are probably much better than I am at talking about the principal parts, but my thermostat has an on-off switch, a hot switch, a cold switch, a fan switch, an auto switch, an emergency heat switch. So you want to talk about those elements and the purpose of each of those elements. When you have a process, it's similar. You want, what is the process? What is the function of the process? Where and when does the process take place? Who or what performs the process? How does it work? And what are the principal steps? So what is the process? One of my students wrote a really good, he was a manager for Chick-fil-A, and he wrote a closing process. So what is the process? Closing up the store at the end of the day. What is the function of the process to ensure that all of the steps are followed correctly? When and where does it? It takes place at the store at midnight. Who or what performs the process? The night manager. How does the process work? It works like a flow chart, maybe, a chronological order. You do this and that, and then what are the principal steps? You're going to list each step, and if any explanation or details need to be added, you'll add those as well. Provide the appropriate detail in a mechanism and object descriptions. This is really important, and choose an organizational principle. Functional. So functional is how does it function? It does this, this, and this. And spatial might be how it looks. First you do this, or first you see this, then you see this. So those are the two organizing principles that you want to follow when you're doing a mechanism or object description. And you also, again, want to use graphics. Use appropriate graphics that help your reader understand how the object works, what it looks like, how it's used. In your process descriptions, structure the step-by-step description chronologically. First you do this, then you do this. Explain the causal relationships. If you close the safe before you turn on the alarm, the safe will not open again for 24 hours. Use the present tense, first this, then this, and again, use graphics. Use images to help your reader know this is what the alarm looks like, this is the button that you press. Take pictures, put arrows, but be as specific and detailed oriented as you can. So here's an example of a process description based on a graphic. So this is completely graphic. There's the bottom line: during the day, your solar electric system will be providing some or all of your electrical needs. It's not really telling you what happens, but you can see from the graphic, the title is How Solar Works. And so we've got sunlight coming down on the panel. That from the panel, it goes to the DC to AC inverter, then it goes up to the main electrical panel, and it can go to electrical appliances, or it can go to a bidirectional utility meter and go to a utility pole power. So it explains to you, and here we have utility meter spins backwards. Okay, so this graphic explains to you a really fairly complex description process, but it does so very easily and simply with the arrows that show you how to flow from one step to the next, and the double arrows that show the bidirectional. So this is all done with images and not a lot of words. So think about how you can be creative when you're doing this as well. Questions to consider when designing a set of instructions. What are your readers' expectations? When you're designing a set of instructions, as with anything else that we've dealt with this semester, you need to pay attention to audience. What is it that your readers need to know? What do they expect? Do you need to create more than one set of instructions for different audiences? So for example, if you are describing a technical process, perhaps to a colleague or coworker who's familiar with the terms, you might design one set of instructions, and then to someone else who is not familiar with the terms, you might design a second set of instructions. What languages should you use? Is this are these instructions going to be used outside of the United States, inside of the United States, and do they require particular kinds of languages so that different readers may access them? What's your reader's attitude going to be? Are they going to be nervous about performing these instructions, following these instructions? Or are they going to be able to, oh, I've got this, they're comfortable with it? What kind of environment are the instructions going to be used? And this directly affects the document design, and you'll remember this, that we talked about it when we were looking at document design. Are they going to be using the information electronically? Are they going to put the paper out, the set of directions out on the floor and open it up and match the parts and that? Are they going to be working at it at their desk, on a computer perhaps? So there are lots of different ways that people can use your instructions, and you need to design your instructions for their use. Maybe there's multiple uses. Maybe some people will print it out, so you'll have instructions set up one way, and maybe some people will use their cell phone, so then they'll be formatted to be able to be followed easily on a cell phone. So it depends on the end user. Design clear and attractive pages. Just as we talked about in the design unit, you want open, airy design. You want graphics that relate to the text. And as we talked about in the document design unit, you want to directly refer to, see figure 1. You don't want to just stick an image in the middle of the page, but you want to label it, and you want to, in your text, introduce or explain to the user what they should be looking at or looking for. So here's an example of a cluttered page design versus an attractive page design. You can see with the design on your left that that is really rather difficult to follow. It is not easy to read or see. Whereas if you look at the image on the right, it's much easier to follow. You've got clearly numbered steps, so you know what order to go in. You've got pictures of the items that you're going to be putting together. So it's much more clear exactly how to proceed. Understand what typical signal words are that are used in manuals and instructions. So danger indicates, excuse me, I apologize. Danger indicates an immediate and serious hazard that could be fatal. Warning indicates a potential for serious injury or death if you're not following instructions correctly. Caution indicates that it could be potential danger for anything from moderate injury to equipment damage or destruction. And note is simply a tip or suggestion to help the readers carry out the process successfully. So understand the difference between these terms and use them appropriately. Here's an example of a safety label. Danger, hazardous voltage, disconnect power before servicing. I've got my symbol on the left, but on the right I have an explanation of what this symbol means, and I've got the danger there. So if I did not disconnect the power before servicing, I could die from being electrocuted. That's what this danger sign indicates. Instructions, again, units like our descriptions, complete units, they should have a clear title, a general introduction, a step-by-step instructions, and a conclusion. Very straightforward, a nice and neat unit. Effective titles for instructions. How to install the J112 shock absorber, or a gerund. A gerund is a noun with an ing added into it. So installing the J112 shock absorber. Either one of those are good. Ineffective titles are long noun strings that don't really tell you a lot. J112 shock absorber installation instructions. That's wordy, and it's just clearer to say how to or installing. Those are much clearer titles, and tell you exactly what information you're going to find in that document. Introductions for your instructions. Your introduction should explain who should carry out this task. So for example, if we're talking about baking a pie, this is probably a task for someone over the age of 12, let's just say. Why should the reader carry out the task? What's the purpose of doing this? How is it going to help them? Why would they want to do it? When should they do it? What time is appropriate? Is this something that should be done at the beginning of the day, in the middle of the day, Can it be done at any time? Does it not matter when it's done? Are there safety measures or basic concerns that the reader needs to understand? So in other words, if we're baking a pie, always use an oven mitt when removing the pie from the oven. Okay, that's a safety measure. What items will the reader need? So list all of the parts that a reader will need in order to complete the instructions or follow the destructions. Destructions. And how long will the task take? Make sure that you explain that this should take 20 minutes or this should take 2 hours, so that your reader has a way to gauge if they're doing something wrong, or maybe they rush through, so obviously they're missing something. So make sure you give them a time. Then you have your steps in your instructions. Number them. Present the right amount of information in each step. That's kind of a general all-purpose term, but really what it means is give enough information so that the person can follow the instructions clearly and without too many questions, all right? But don't be overly wordy, because if it's too wordy, then the person's going to get lost in following the instructions. So that's why present the right amount. Use the imperative mood. Do this, then do that. That's the imperative mood with the understand you do this. Instead, you're using a command, basically, do this, then do this. Don't confuse steps with feedback statements. So for example, if I have step number 3 and I want to provide, if this happens, then do this, or if this happens, then do that, then I need to somehow in my document design it in such a way, maybe I put my feedback statements in italics, maybe I bullet them, indent them, but I do something, maybe I put note. But I do something to indicate to the reader that these are feedback statements. Again, just like everything else we've talked about this evening, include graphics. Don't omit articles like A, N, and the to save space, because it can be important and can confuse the reader. So make sure that you include your articles and write in grammatically correct sentences. Finally, for writing instructions for multicultural readers, in what language should the information be written? Consider that. Do the text or graphics need to be modified for a particular language? For example, if you are writing these directions or having your directions translated into Arabic, and they read from right to left rather than left to right, there's going to be some serious modification that needs to be done. What is the reader's technological infrastructure? Are they going to have computers available? Are they going to have cell phones available? Are they going to need to look up terms and those kinds of things to consider? And again, that's just, it says for multicultural readers, but these are good questions to consider just generally when designing a document. So that concludes tonight's lecture. If you have any questions or concerns, by all means, post them in the questions and comments or send me an email, and I'll talk to you again soon.